and then disappeared off the radar screens right here outside of the Pittsburgh area, a place called Shanksville. We don't know what happened there. What's kind of odd about this one, Joey, is that at some point after flying past Pittsburgh, the pilot apparently radioed and changed his destination to DCA, which is Ronald Reagan National Airport. Unclear what that means. Now let me just kind of put this all onto one graphic, if you will. If we can put up that graphic, and I'll use the telestrator to show you exactly what's going on. All right, here are the important cities. First of all, let's take a look at 8 a.m. and see what happens at 8 a.m. And that was the first departure. Okay, this is the flight, American Airlines Flight 11. Was headed out this way to Los Angeles, 81 passengers, 11 crew member. Now, 8:15. United Flight 175 heads out a little different route across, also headed for Los Angeles. That was at 8:15. 8:21 a.m., Dulles Airport is your location, and that is American Airlines Flight 77, a 757, 58 passengers and crew. It headed off onto Los Angeles. We don't have a radar track on this, so I'm doing a little bit of speculation there. Finally, United Airlines Flight 93 at 8:43 as it departs Newark Airport and begins its trip all the way over to Cleveland. Now, let's get the impact times here. 8:45, the flight, American Airlines Flight 11, impacts in New York at the World Trade Center. 9:03, the United Flight 175 impacts at the World Trade Center. 9:45 a.m., and of course all these times are Eastern times, the flight, American Airlines flight that was headed from Dulles to Dulles to Los Angeles, hits at the excuse me, I should have been drawing that to New York. I was drawing it to Washington. Hits at the Pentagon. My apologies on that. And then finally, United Air Flight 93 ends up in outside of Pittsburgh. I made a bit of a hash there, but that gives you a sense of how well coordinated this was and how sophisticated an operation this was. A couple of points to remember. The fact that if you can fly a 757, you can fly a 767, identical cockpits, so if you were training somebody to fly that aircraft, they're more or less interchangeable. But the point that is worth mentioning here is you had 4 large airliners on transcontinental flights with extreme deviations. The air traffic control system clearly was upset by this. I'm very curious to hear what they have to say about the radio transmissions and whether at some point the big picture was ever analyzed. It's done by individual centers. Maybe the big picture wasn't analyzed.
Miles O'Brien, our correspondent, thanks very much for your insight into all this. Now we return to Aaron Brown up in New York. Aaron.
Joey, Miles, thank you. That is a great point. You do wonder if air traffic controllers were ever able to put the pieces together, and if they were, what they must have thought, what went through their minds this morning when they realized that they had not one anomaly, but that they had several going on at the same time, all one heading to Washington and 2 heading here in New York. CNN's Tim O'Brien has been working the phones, as all of us have been throughout the day, and he joins us from Washington with an extraordinary piece of information on the Pentagon crash. Tim, are you there?
I am. Our understanding is that Barbara Olson was on the plane, a frequent commentator on CNN and the wife of Solicitor General Ted Olson. She called her husband twice during the hijacking to tell him the plane had been hijacked. And they lost contact once, and she called back. After the first call, Olson called the command center at the Justice Department to inform them of this hijacking, and they said they knew nothing about it but would track it down. Barbara Olson told Ted the following story, that all the passengers were herded to the back of the plane, including the flight personnel, including the pilot. And the only weapons she mentioned were knives and cardboard cutters. You would think if there were a machine gun or any other kind of gun that she would have mentioned that. But the only weapons she mentioned were knives and cardboard cutters. I asked Ted if she made any reference to nationality of the hijackers or any suspicions about the motive, and he said she made no reference to that at all. They didn't have a whole lot of time to talk. She said to Ted, "What do I tell the pilot to do?" Somewhat typical of Barbara, a take charge kind of person. But there was nothing they could do, and they're all trapped in the back of the plane.
Did she, or was she able to tell Mr. Olson how many hijackers were on board the plane? Or at least how many she may have seen?
I asked Ted that. He said, no, but she referred to them as more than one. More than one. Incidentally, she wasn't even supposed to be on this flight. She was booked on a flight yesterday, but today is Ted's birthday, so she wanted to be here this morning to have breakfast with him before she left.
And
Sad story.
It's a horrible story, and one can only assume that it is one of many horrible stories that we will hear in the hours ahead. It says something about the world we live in, that people, while this was going on, were able to make cell phone calls. We heard earlier today of another call that was made from a plane, that there was some awareness on the ground, perhaps not formal awareness, but some awareness of what was going on, at least on some of those, excuse me, on some of those planes. Mr. Olson must be devastated.
Well, you can imagine. He's surrounded by friends, but this is tough for everybody. It's tough for the country, but it's particularly tough for the loved ones.
It is indeed. Tim, thank you for your efforts.
Sure.
Thank you for your efforts today. We appreciate that. Again, Barbara Olson, one of the 200-plus passengers on 4 different airliners, and we have no reason to believe that any of those people survived the crashes today here in New York, in Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh, and at the Pentagon in Washington. We still do not have a very good feel, to be perfectly honest, for how many people have died today. We have no particular feel, to be perfectly honest, how many people have been injured. We can only surmise that we are talking in the hundreds, the thousands of people certainly have been injured today. How many of those will survive, we do not yet know. Judy?
And Aaron, this may be another point where we want to say, God bless the souls of those who have lost their lives today or who are dying as we speak in hospitals and in places where they cannot be reached. I think even those out there who may not believe that there is a God, at a time like this, we all reach out for a higher being, and we want to believe that there is someone who can bring us salvation. Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon, questions today about the whereabouts of some of the top people in government in the United States. We've known the president's been flying around the country. The vice president's been out of sight. The Secretary of Defense, Mr. Rumsfeld, has also been out of sight. What can you tell us about him, and what else is going on there?
A short time ago, he did come out and inspect the damage here at the Pentagon, along with the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Richard Myers. We're so far away, though, we could barely see that it was them. It had to be pointed out to me by a Pentagon official who they were. The Secretary of Defense, although initially ran to the scene, apparently, of the tragedy and actually assisted getting some people onto stretchers, was then brought back to the National Military Command Center in the bowels of the Pentagon, a secure war room area where he has been receiving intelligence briefings and informational updates. The Pentagon says that it can account for all of the senior military leadership. None of them were killed in this attack. However, there have been some
Jamie
McIntyre,
I'm sorry to interrupt. We're going to go to Israel. The Prime Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon.
Of terror attacks, the worst that had ever been seen. We express our deep regret and send our condolences, wholehearted condolences. We are ready to extend whatever aid and assistance is required. War against terror is an international war, a war of a coalition of the free world against all the terror groups and against whoever believes that can pose a threat to freedom. This is a war between the good and the bad, between humanity and those who are bloodthirsty. The criminal attack today on innocent civilians in the United States is a turning point in war against international terror. Even if the war against terror is long, and even if the terror will try to raise its head again, there won't be any room in the world in which terrorists, their assistants, and those who send them to be able to find a shelter or a refuge. The government of Israel has decided tomorrow, a mourning day, in a show of solidarity with the American people. I would like to send my condolences to the American people, to President George Bush, and to all the citizens of the United States. In this very difficult hour, our hearts are with you.
בערוץ הראשון, האם תוכל לומר לציבור בישראל מהם ההשלכות שיש עליו?
Could you tell the Israeli public what are the impacts of these attacks on the people here? I have already said very clearly that there will only be a statement. There won't be any other statement apart from what I have already said. We have to wait and see what happened. Our stand vis-à-vis terror is very well known, very firm and decisive, and we will act accordingly.
On behalf
רק נציין עוד ששר החוץ שמעון פרס העביר בשעות האחרונות מסרים לרשות הפלסטינית בהמשך להחלטת המטבחון שבעת הזאת עליהם להפסיק באופן מיידי את הטרור במצב הנוכחי ושיטב להם אם יעשו זאת מבחינתם באופן חד צדדי לרשות הפלסטינית. זה המסר ששמעון פרס העביר. עד כאן יעקב.
Against our common values. The fight against terror is an international struggle of the free world against the forces of darkness who seek to destroy our liberty and our way of life. I believe that together we can defeat these forces of evil. At this most difficult hour, all Israelis stand as one with the American people. Our hearts are with you, and we are ready to provide any assistance at any time. The government of Israel has declared a day of mourning tomorrow as we bow our heads and share in the sorrow of the American people. טוב, תודה רבה לכם.
Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon talking briefly with reporters, offering first of all his condolences to Americans, saying whoever believes or saying rather this has been a threat to freedom. He went on to say this is a criminal attack on innocent civilians, and he called it a turning point in the war against international terrorism. He went on to say, he said, even if this war is long, there will be no room for terrorists to find refuge. He also said that tomorrow in Israel will be a day of mourning. Now we want to go back to the Pentagon, to CNN's military affairs correspondent, Jamie McIntyre. You want to pick up where you left off, Jamie, describing the situation there and also what Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld is up to.
Well, Judy, the fires are still burning here in some parts of the Pentagon, as you can see from some of the smoke that's coming up from behind me. There will be a recovery effort that will get underway fairly soon. A lot of heavy equipment has brought in so-called urban rescue units that are usually used in the event of an earthquake, have been brought in from some of the local fire departments in Fairfax and Montgomery County in order to assist in trying to find the bodies of people here. They have not given any casualty figures, but we know that people died in this incident, including, not the least of which is the more than 60 passengers who were on that American Airlines Flight 77 that took off from Dulles Airport this morning. One of the eyewitnesses to this incident was a TV reporter himself who was in traffic and actually saw the plane come in. I talked to him earlier today. His name is Mike Walter of USA Today Live.
I was heading in northbound on 27, and the traffic this morning, it was, you know, a typical rush hour, had ground to a standstill, and I looked off, looked out my window, I saw this plane, a jet, American Airlines jet coming, and I thought, this doesn't add up, it's really low, and I saw it just went, I mean, it was like a cruise missile with wings, went right there and slammed right into the Pentagon. Huge explosion, great ball of fire, and smoke started billowing out, and then it was just chaos on the highway as people either tried to move around the traffic and go down either forward or backwards. We had a lady who was in front of me who was backing up and screaming, "Everybody go back, they've hit the Pentagon." And, you know, it's just sheer terror. I mean,
what goes through your mind when you see something like that?
You know, I've asked that question of a million people, and you know, the only thing that I just kept uttering it over and over again. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I can't believe this. And I think that's what goes through your mind, is that you just can't believe that something like this could happen. And yet I was sitting there listening on the radio to the accounts of what had happened in New York. I just listened to the president. And you'd think, as a journalist, I'd put two and two together and think, oh my God, but it didn't even occur to me.
And obviously this was an enormous tragedy, but did you witness any of the rescue or any of the victims?
I got to tell you, I got out and walked over, and I saw parts of the plane. The debris was actually on the overpass there, and I watched as this military personnel just came running out with stretchers and tarps and set up a triage unit. And I just couldn't help but feel for these guys. You know, those are their friends and comrades in there, and yet they immediately jumped into action. It was unbelievable to watch. And the toughest thing for me right now is I've got a 14-year-old daughter, and a lot of her friends have parents who work in the Pentagon. And I just talked to her on the phone, and those kids are going through agony tonight. They don't know if they're okay. So it's tough. I mean, this really hits home.
And Judy, there's still a lot of work to be done here. This part of the Pentagon had undergone a major renovation. Some of the people here told me stories about heroic efforts. Others described how some of the new architecture of the renovated Pentagon may have helped save their lives. One Navy officer told me about how he saw the flames rush by his window, which shook, but because they're made of new tempered glass that had been put in to increase security, they did not break. The work will continue throughout the night. Pentagon officials say they do hope to reoccupy the other part of the building that's not affected. It's a huge building. 24,000 people work here, but it may be a number of days before anybody's able to go back to work. Judy?
All right, Jamie McIntyre reporting from the Pentagon. And Jamie, your interview reminding us that first and foremost, this is a horrific human tragedy. Families with hearts broken in New York, in Washington, and all across this nation. Just a quick word on what we've been learning. We do expect tonight President George Bush will speak to the nation in a televised address. We don't have much more information than that in terms of when. In addition, we are told that the 4 leaders of Congress, the House Speaker Dennis Hastert, the House Democratic leader Richard Gephardt, and over in the Senate side, Tom Daschle, the Democratic leader, and Trent Lott, the Republican leader, all 4 of them will come together at, I'm told, 7:30 on the east front of the Capitol for a news statement, perhaps a news conference. We all know that at times of crisis, the very visceral fights that go on between the political parties in our country fall away. It may only be for a brief period, but this is one of those times when political partisan differences are being put aside to come together to speak to the country. Joining me here in the Washington studio, a familiar name, a familiar face, best-selling author of so many novels, Tom Clancy, mysteries at the heart, Tom Clancy, of the military community, the intelligence community. People in our newsroom have been saying today what's happening is like right out of a Tom Clancy novel. But could you possibly imagine something like this to write about?
No, one of the problems with being a writer of fiction is that you can't keep up with all the madmen in the world as much as you try. And I frankly would have thought that this was not a credible threat to have 4 separate people decide to commit suicide in the same way on the same morning.
Why not?
Because ending your own life is not something the average person does. You know, everybody's assuming these are Islamic terrorists. Well, if so, they've defiled their own religion. You know, Islam does not permit suicide. It says you go to hell if you do something like this.
But we see suicide bombings in the Middle East and in Israel. And
Judy, we saw people in Northern Ireland, Catholics acting like savages and Protestants acting like savages. So anyhow, we have people who call themselves Muslims acting like savages. It happens. It's not because of their religion. It's because they're fools.
What does this say now? I mean, you've done a lot of reporting. I mean, you not only write fiction, you do a lot of reporting from inside the intelligence community, inside the military community. What does this say about how prepared we are as a country?
Well, people always ask that kind of a question when things go wrong, but you don't ask the question when things go right, and the reason is you can't tell when things go right in that business. Well, one of the things I've been saying for a lot of years is that we need to upgrade the human capability, the human intelligence capabilities in CIA and the rest of our intelligence community, because you can do a lot with satellites, you can do a lot with eavesdropping techniques, but you can't find out what's in a person's mind except by talking to that person. And so the agency needs to increase its human intelligence capability. The CIA has about 20,000 employees, less than 1,000 of whom are actually field intelligence officers. That number should be at least doubled. But yeah, America as a nation doesn't love our intelligence community. And certainly the news media does not love our intelligence community.
I'm going to interrupt you, Tom Clancy. I'm told Aaron Brown in New York has a development. Aaron?
Well, Judy, just in the last few seconds, another building, we will speculate carefully here that there was building number 7, one of the buildings in support of the World Trade Center towers has collapsed. Those of you who have been with us for a while, you can see indeed that the smoke color has changed has gotten much lighter. So we believe that yet another building, this would be the 3rd building, has collapsed, likely building number 7. Although we also heard that there were problems at building number 5, and it's possible that one went down too. But again, another building in the Trade Center complex appears now to have caved in after these attacks. Judy?
Aaron, we're looking at these pictures, Tom Clancy and I, as we sit here in the Washington studio, and just as I come back to Tom Clancy, I want to read just a portion of a statement issued by Secretary of State Colin Powell, calling these attacks a terrible tragedy befallen not just my nation, but all the nations of this region, all the nations of the world, all those who believe in democracy. Tom Clancy, you were saying, sure, we can ask these questions about failed security, failed intelligence when things go wrong, but we have every right to ask these questions, don't we?
Well, no, first, remember, you have a right to say anything you want, but it's a practical matter. One of the things we have to do, if you want to prevent things like this from happening, is you build up your defenses. And your first line of defense against terrorism is an intelligence gathering capability. Now, when was the last time CNN or the news media in general said, gee, we ought to put more money into the human intelligence capabilities of the CIA? Answer, you never do it. Never.
Well, we wouldn't take a side on something like that anyway, in terms of what do you fund and...
Yeah, but you always take a side on saying they failed. Why not help them succeed once in a while?
Are you saying that they are significantly underfunded in that area? And not just the CIA, but the FBI?
Human intelligence is de-emphasized. The FBI's job is...
Spying is what we're talking about
yeah,
here.
that's what intelligence officers do, is they spy. And the CIA has 20,000 employees, about 800 of whom are actually spooks. And of them, maybe as many as 2/3 actually get outside and do spook operations.
And we know that...
And we need to do better than that. We need to do more than that. You gather information of this type by putting people out on the street, same way cops gather information from informants. This isn't rocket science. It's just a matter of hiring the people and letting them do the work.
But I'm going to turn it back over to Aaron, but my question is, how do you know what to believe? We had an Arab journalist in London just today saying, we had this information a few weeks ago, it was coming, we didn't know whether to believe it. Now back to Aaron in New York.
Thank you. We've talked a number of times today about the fact that it is simply too dangerous for officials to get in and around these buildings. It's so very, very dangerous, and the proof of that, just a few moments ago when another building in the complex that is the World Trade Center, or was the World Trade Center, collapsed. Maureen, we can show you what that looked like. These are taped pictures taken literally just a few moments ago when that building went down. We are seeing them for the first time. this is, correct me in the booth, but I believe that was, in fact, a piece of tape that we got just a bit ago of the second plane hitting the South Tower of the Trade Center just a little bit after 9 o'clock this morning. Again, a third building at the Trade Center has collapsed within the last 3 or 4 minutes. Building number 7, this is no small building, as you can see, at 47 stories. It would stand out in most American cities. It looks small, I guess, when you look at what was the 100+ stories of the World Trade Center, but building number 7, it's 40+ stories, almost 50 stories, collapsing as well. And if we can go back to the tape and see it one more time, and I'll look at it with you. Again, this occurred just in the last several moments around the Trade Center building. Building number 7, 47 stories. Maureen Madden, CNN producer, is in the area. Maureen, what can you tell us? What did you see?
Well, about 2 minutes ago, we happened to see 7 World Trade Center go down, which holds the Office of Emergency Management for the City of New York on the 23rd floor there. When we heard from the fire department of NYPD, is that the whole south part of the building was engulfed in flames at one point, and it was a matter of time to collapse. They're just waiting for it to collapse, which we've been waiting for about a half hour. When it went down, it was quick, it was quiet, and we saw a lot of smoke come up. And now the smoke has pretty much gone off to the side, going towards the east side of Manhattan.
So unlike the collapse of the first of the towers way back this morning, around 10 or so this morning, and then the second tower, which collapsed shortly thereafter, at least where building number 7 is concerned, a building that, among other things, housed the emergency response team of the City of New York, at least they had some warning. They had signs that this might happen, and they were able to get as many people away from the area. And the people in the area, of course, are firefighters, EMS personnel, and literally thousands of police officers who have cordoned off the area.
Correct. About 5 minutes ago.
For those of you who have been with us throughout the day, we have shown you a number of times a piece of video, pictures of a plane coming into the building. We have now another piece of video that will show the same thing, different angle, and if we can roll that and take a look now. This again was shortly after the first. Wow, oh my gosh. I wonder, this comes to us from PAX TV. I wonder, guys, if we can re-cue that in a moment and show that again. You see the fire coming out of the first building there, the plane on the lower left side of your screen. And it looks to me, and I'll confess I don't have the greatest monitor here, that you could almost see the nose of that plane coming through the other side of the building. That may have been an illusion as we looked at it here, but that's how it looked to us. As the flames, these are fully loaded planes, fully loaded with jet fuel. They were headed from the East Coast to the West Coast, so they had an enormous amount of jet fuel. Jeffrey Beatty, a security consultant, said to us a little bit ago, this was low-tech, high-concept. The plane was the bomb, and you just saw the bomb go off. That was around 10 o'clock this morning. That was around 9 o'clock this morning, about 9:08 this morning. Ben Wiedemann, who normally reports for us, I'm sorry, we'll get to that. Let's go back to Washington and CNN's Judy Woodruff. Judy?
Aaron, again, pictures that have everyone here riveted. We're told, I don't know whether we have this picture right now available to show our viewers, but I'm told that just a short time ago, driving up Massachusetts Avenue, which is one of the main thoroughfares here in the nation's capital, goes all the way from the Capitol out to northwest Washington, beyond the Naval Observatory where the Vice President lives, and beyond on out into the Maryland suburbs. There was observed a convoy of military vehicles, Humvee, Humvees, military vehicles, driving up slowly, patrolling, appearing to patrol the area, going out away from the Capitol toward northwest, toward Maryland. Now, perhaps this is just a patrolling effort, but the sight of it has to be something to cause comment, because normally at this hour in Washington you would see an enormous amount of just rush hour traffic, but today is not like any other day. Now to our own senior White House correspondent, John King, who's just about a block and a half from the White House on top of an office building up above the 10th floor there. John?
Judy, a few quick bits of information. As we have been reporting, the president is on his way back to Washington, and we can now say definitively that when he arrives in Washington, he will address the American people tonight. I am told by sources plans are for an address from the White House. The target time, 9 p.m. That could be moved up a little, but 8 or 9 p.m. we are now told is the target time. But for now, the administration will not confirm that the address will be broadcast from the White House. There have been security concerns throughout the day. We see now on the grounds of the White House, which was evacuated hours ago, some bomb-sniffing dogs and other security personnel securing the area around the White House. But we are told by administration officials the president will be back in Washington shortly and will address the American people tonight. And as we reported a bit earlier, congressional leaders who also, as part of the protocol, the emergency evacuation protocol, were taken to secure locations themselves outside of Washington. The bipartisan congressional leadership also making its way back to Washington, and it will deliver statements, the 4 leaders from the steps of the Capitol tonight as well. All of these designed to offer signs of reassurances to the American people that their government is up and running at this time of great tragedy. I want to add one other bit of information. A lot of lawmakers trying to get briefings from Capitol Hill police, from administration officials, from the CIA and the FBI and others. We are told that in those briefings there has been some speculation, and again the law enforcement officials saying this is just speculation at this moment, that plane that crashed outside of Pittsburgh may have been heading toward Washington. In those briefings, I'm told by several sources, 3 potential targets were listed. 1, the presidential retreat at Camp David. 2, the White House. And 3, the United States Capitol building. Again, though, lawmakers and other officials being given those briefings told that is speculative, but based on the flight paths and everything else we've seen unfold on this tragic day, that law enforcement officials believe at this moment that the potential targets for that plane, which crashed outside Pittsburgh, were perhaps Camp David, perhaps the White House behind me, or perhaps the United States Capitol. Judy?
John, and we can only imagine the struggle that must have gone on board that aircraft in the cockpit or wherever in order to keep the plane from going where the people who wanted to bring it to Washington, they were obviously prevented from reaching their target. Air travel throughout the United States, domestic air travel, has been shut down today since these terrible accident incidents in New York City and here in Washington. In fact, there's no air travel until at least noon tomorrow on order of the Federal Aviation Administration. But right now we want to go to one of the airports in the Washington area, that is Dulles International. This is the site of where the American Airlines flight 77 that left this morning on its way to Los Angeles and ended up plowing into the Pentagon a very short time later. CNN's Eileen O'Connor is there at Dulles. Eileen?
Well, there has been some activity here, Judy. The FBI has arrived, and they have been seen going in and out of the building. They brought some equipment in to check through the building. We do know from airport personnel and the airport authority that both National and Dulles are shut down till 11 o'clock at least tomorrow morning, but also that they immediately implemented an emergency drill procedure. And that means that they called in all of their police, and they have their own police force and their own fire personnel, and they also have all of their operational staff here at the airport. They are securing the airport. You can see actually behind me, they have actually erected barricades, concrete barricades, with some of these forklifts. Have been operating over the last hour, erecting these barricades. Also, there's barricades right now in the entrances to the airport to prevent anyone from coming back here. As you also said, United and American Airlines, obviously they are the ones that lost flights. They have been issuing statements saying that they are trying to help the families, both of these airlines issuing statements. They've also said that they have accounted for all of their other flights and that they are all safely on the ground. They want to make sure people know that. And they also say that they will do everything they can to make sure that their customers, the people who were traveling, are comfortable until they can fly on to their destinations. Judy?
And Eileen, any other people around there? I mean, we see you, obviously, and we see a few other people, but presumably not much other activity there at all.
No, and they have actually tried to stage some of the, obviously there are relatives, concerned relatives from the American flight that took off from this morning, and we are being told by airport authorities that they are trying to send those relatives over to a nearby hotel and to try to give them information. Both airlines have issued phone numbers for for people to find out about loved ones. One of those airlines is United. Their number is 800-932-8555. But they are saying that people should stay away from the airports. These airports are shut. Again, they're under emergency procedures. And also, you know, Judy, for here, an investigation is taking place. The FBI is already here. They've had sniffer dogs around the airport. They want to see how the security was breached. We are also told that the tarmac has been secure, that the airplanes that are currently on the ground were very quickly secured after it was decided to shut these airports down. Judy?
Eileen, just reiterating, there were 8 cities in the United States involved with these aircraft that plowed into the Trade Center building complex, into the Pentagon, and then into the ground in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, south of Pittsburgh. 2 planes took off from Boston, 1 from Newark, 1 from Dulles near Washington, where you are. 3 of those flights were headed for Los Angeles, 1 for San Francisco. Of course, none of those flights reached their intended destination. Now back to Aaron in New York.
Judy, thank you. It is, I know for many of you around the country, you are making your way home. You have not necessarily been with us all day long. Life has gone on, I suppose, with TVs on in most offices, but life has gone on. I just wonder if we can take a shot of the building behind me, the World Trade Center building, and just take a moment to try and absorb, not with the facts, not with the pieces of information, but just look at that scene and think about what happened today. There were 50,000 or so people who came to work on a beautiful late summer morning here in New York, in those 2 towers that are now gone. These are people with families, with children, people who had offices and have them no more, people whose lives are forever changed. And it happened in a space of very few minutes. 8:48 this morning it began. A few minutes later, at about 9:08, a second plane zoomed towards the unhit tower, the second tower. You see it in the lower part of your screen. And it just slices that tower in half. If we can re-rack it and show it again so you'll know where to look, you'll see the plane first in the lower left side of the screen coming at it, and there it goes. And what must it have been like in those buildings and on these hijacked airliners? We heard earlier that Barbara Olson, a frequent commentator here, was on the flight that was going to Washington, or had been hijacked to Washington. She called her husband and said that the hijacking was underway. She said that from what she could tell, the hijackers, and she didn't indicate how many, except there was more than one, were armed with just knives and cardboard cutters, that they had herded all the people on board this flight to the back of the plane, including the pilot. And she asked her husband, the Solicitor General, Ted Olson, who many of you will recall argued the post-election case before the Supreme Court, said to her husband, "What do I do?" And shortly after that, that plane with Ms. Olson and many more crashed at the Pentagon. General Wesley Clark joins us from Little Rock. General Clark has been with us a number of times today. General, I wonder if you will weigh in for a second on this debate or this discussion that has been going on for most of the afternoon here, which is, have we misapplied in some ways intelligence resources, that we have become so infatuated with what we can do with machines and high tech that we have inappropriately, I guess, spent less money, less time, less effort on the down and dirty human intelligence?
Well, that's certainly a question that everyone is going to be asking, and it will be asked in official channels, and it will be asked to those who are best in a position to give that answer. My experience with it has been that I've heard this charge now for some 25 years in the intelligence business, and we have put emphasis into not only technical intelligence but human intelligence. But you know, it's very hard to get the kind of specific intelligence that would prevent something like this. Many of these people are members of a family. They come from a specific village, perhaps. Their background is known and vetted. They're carefully controlled. Their movements and communications are monitored. And it's difficult, no doubt, for any intelligence organization, no matter how well it's resourced and how courageous its members, to penetrate an organization like that and give us information. Intelligence is always characterized by a failure to know what you don't know. And I'm sure that we'll make improvements. There are always more things that can be done in the aftermath of something like this. But if there's one single message that comes through to me here, and I think will come through to many others, it's that it's not enough simply to put up the best defenses against terrorism, but that more active measures are no doubt called for, particularly in this case.
When you say more active measures, you're talking about proactive?
That's right. Preemptive measures. We've known a number of these groups have for a long time said they declared war on the United States. And we have dealt with them, we've fenced with them, we've cooperated with other governments against them, we've chased individuals, we've hauled some into court. But I think that not only do we have to ask ourselves, could we have learned more in this specific case, we have to also ask ourselves, could we have done more if we've been willing to take greater risks, if we've been willing to take more extraordinary measures earlier, to take some of these groups and these individuals at their word that they had declared war on us and they deserved to be taken seriously and they merited some preemptive action.
And just perhaps stating the obvious, sir, when you talk about preemptive action, first of all, you got to be able to find the people you're taking the action against. Do we know where the right people are, so that if the country is going after these people, they get the right people?
Well, I think that's always the problem. And there will always be a certain degree of uncertainty, and there'll be a certain degree of concern about this. The best way to handle any international terrorist organization is to arrest its leaders, present the evidence, and have them tried in a court of law. And that certainly is the way anyone would prefer to deal with this. But perhaps in some cases it's not possible to do that, or it's not possible to do that quick enough. We'll have to ask those questions in the aftermath. It's not simply about intelligence, it's also about acting on intelligence.
I mean, ultimately, sir, this is not simply a military or an intelligence question. This is a core political question. It really has to do with how we see ourselves in a country, whether we are willing to take the risks that some innocents may perish because of what we as a country do, and that's a political question for the country to deal with.
It's a profound political question, and I think it's also a question for the international community, because an event like this is a real cry for alarm and recognition in the international community. A tragedy like this can happen here, it can happen anywhere. And international terrorism is too dangerous and too ambiguous and too difficult for any single nation to handle by itself. We need strong, reliable support from friends and allies around the world, and I'm sure we'll be asking for it. And clearly one of the things that ought to come from this is not only better U.S. intelligence, it's better sharing of information, pooling of information with our partners in all corners of the globe.
General Clark, thanks again for joining us, as you have a number of other times today, and I suspect you will again before the day is out. General Wesley Clark in Little Rock, Arkansas today. Thank you, sir.
Thank
Judy?
you.
Aaron, we want to tell our viewers, first of all, that we have just been handed a report from CNN reporter Patty Davis that all international flights have now arrived or will be arriving shortly. Those are flights coming into the United States or Canada. Those are flights that presumably had left their destination hours and hours ago, but they have arrived safely, or they are expected to shortly. We'll continue to bring you updates on air travel as we get them. And I've just been told that President Bush will address the nation tonight at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. Now, we had been told a little bit earlier the President would be speaking to the American people. We now have confirmed the time is 9 o'clock Eastern, and you can count on the fact, of course, CNN will carry that address. CNN correspondent Jean Meserve has spent the last several hours at the Federal Emergency Management Agency. These are the people who, Jean, are dealing all the time with disasters. Bring us up to date on what's going on there now.
Judy, the National Interagency Emergency Operations Center is up and running here, as it is often at times of disaster. We went up and looked at that a couple of hours ago. There are about 40 people up there. They represent 28 different government agencies and offices, also the Red Cross and the Salvation Army. What they do is try and figure out what local and state officials need to help them deal with a disaster situation, and they have already made some moves today. They have dispatched urban search and rescue task forces. 4 of them have been sent to the Pentagon. 4 are en route to New York City. Another 4 have been activated, 3 of those in California, 1 in Missouri. Last time I was able to speak to an official here, they were trying to figure out how to get them to New York City. Apparently it was going to take a military airlift because, of course, there is no commercial air traffic at this time. Each of those task forces consists of 62 people and about 60,000 pounds of equipment. That's medical gear, tools, dogs, food. The idea is they are supposed to be able to be self-sufficient for 72 hours at a stretch. They provide a wide array of services. They will do search and rescue. They can shut off utilities. They can check the structural integrity of buildings. There are a total of 28 of these task forces around the country. We've been told that the other 16 most of them have been put on alert status, but they have not yet been activated and given orders to move. In addition, disaster mortuary affairs teams, 4 of them have been sent to New York City, 3 of them to the Pentagon. 30 people on each of these teams. What they do is help take care of the bodies after they have been extricated from the wreckage. Also, there are disaster medical assistance teams, 4 of them to New York, 3 to the Pentagon, 35 people on each of those teams. Those would be doctors, nurses, and paramedics to help, of course, with the medical situation. I should mention that the director of this agency, Joe Alba, was not in Washington when these events took place. He was out in Montana at a conference of the National Emergency Managers Conference. This is all the state emergency directors from around the country. He, of course, immediately made moves to get back to Washington. We believe he is now on his way here. Judy, back to you.
All right, Jean Meserve telling us about the teams of experienced people who are being deployed from FEMA. That's the nickname for the Federal Emergency Management Agency, headquartered here in Washington. But right now, teams of people being sent out, deployed to the sites of these horrific disasters. The New York Twin Towers, World Trade Center. You're still looking at those live pictures on the right part of your screen here in Washington, to the Pentagon, the site of another airplane crash. Joining us now from Charlottesville, Virginia, former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger. He was Secretary in the administration of the first President, George Bush. I want to ask you, Secretary Eagleburger, so many people, we've been talking to a lot of people today, but it seems to me that many Americans now are going to want to strike back, to get back as soon as we can and as hard as we can at whoever was behind this. How realistic is that?
Oh boy, that's a very tough question. Well, it won't be quick, I think. It'll take us some time to organize ourselves, try to figure out who was responsible for this, although I might say, by the way, that's less of a concern to me than it will be to a number of others. We know who most of the terrorists are. We may not know which ones did this, although they have to have been very, very well organized and very well financed. But getting back at it almost is the wrong way, I think, to put this. So that's what a lot of people will want. What I think we need now to understand is this really is a war with terrorism, and we need to be prepared to act as if we are at war, and that does not necessarily mean that you have to strike back only at those that you know were the perpetrators of this thing.
Well, what does it mean?
We know a lot of terrorists around the world, and we know a lot of governments that have financed and supported terrorism. And you start with Osama bin Laden, I suppose, and you start with the Afghans.
Well, what can you do, Mr. Secretary?
Well, what you do, and this is what you do, is you strike at them militarily. I mean, I know this is going to sound awful, but my point is there's only one way to begin to deal with people like this, and that is you have to kill some of them, even if they are not immediately, directly involved in this thing. We do know that the Taliban and the government of Afghanistan has mothered Osama bin Laden for years. They need to be hit. Either they need to be hit, or they need to understand very quickly that they have got to stop supporting terrorism, and then make it evident that they're stopping the terrorism.
So you're not talking about a long, drawn-out investigation, as we had with Pan Am 103 over Lockerbie,
I hope not.
A long, drawn-out effort to extradite possible suspects.
I hope not. I hope not, because if that's the case, well, you saw what happened with Pan Am 103. I mean, by the time it was all done, first of all, many people had lost all interest in the subject. This is an act of war. When they compare this to Pearl Harbor, I don't think they're wrong in the sense that it's a surprise attack. And I suspect, if we are wise about this, Pearl Harbor brought the American people together and made us recognize we had something we had to deal with. Perhaps this will do the same thing for all of us.
All right, former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger.
Can I make one more point?
Yes, Mr. Secretary, you may.
We need to find out what happened that these planes could be hijacked. That, to me, is the most critical question of all. How was it possible to hijack these aircraft? I thought we had dealt with that problem before. If, in fact, if they had not been hijacked, none of this would have happened.
Well, we did hear just from a fragment of information, Mr. Secretary, reportedly from Barbara Olson, the conservative commentator, the wife of the United States Solicitor General, told her husband and others in a phone call these were men who had hijacked. This was the American Airlines flight that left Dulles, that these men, as far as she could tell, only had knives and paper or cardboard cutters on them as weapons. We want to thank Secretary Lawrence Eagleburger for joining us. Joey Chen in Atlanta.
Judy, thanks very much. For our viewers who have just been trying to catch up on all the events that have occurred today, I want to bring you first up to date with the latest information on a full detailed tick-tock of what has happened in the course of this day. We'll get the latest from Ben Wiedemann.
8:45 a.m. in New York. Smoke billows from the World Trade Center after a large passenger plane slammed into the North Tower. Initial reports suggested it was an accident. 9:03, another airliner hits the Trade Center's South Tower, an explosion bursting from the building's upper floors.
2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center.
President Bush calls the crashes an apparent terrorist attack. 9:45, another hit. A commercial plane crashes into the Pentagon. 9:51. Taking no chances, the Federal Aviation Administration grounds all takeoffs and landings and reroutes incoming international flights to Canada. And the Pentagon soon upgrades its terrorism alert status to Delta, the highest possible level. 10 a.m. Back in New York, the Trade Center's South Tower crumbles to the ground. 10:29, the North Tower collapses. These buildings were once the tallest in the world. Lower Manhattan, home to the city's financial district, is shrouded in smoke, dust, and ash. 10:10 a.m., a half hour earlier, United Flight 93, bound from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco, crashes into western Pennsylvania. Police there say initial reports suggest there were no survivors. In Washington, the Departments of Justice, State, Treasury, and Defense were among those ordered evacuated, as were the Capitol and the White House. In New York, major businesses and stock exchanges were evacuated. All tunnels and bridges into and out of the city were shut down. The United Nations was evacuated as a precaution. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of people are feared hurt or killed in what is clearly the worst ever terrorist attack on the United States. Ben Wiedemann, CNN.
More perspective now. We turn to Brian Jenkins, who is a counterterrorism expert. He joins us from Los Angeles this afternoon. Sir, I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit. I mean, it cannot escape our attention that the targets struck were in the very seats of U.S. wealth, of U.S. military power, and indeed very symbolic structures. I wonder if you can give us some indication about what the terrorists, what symbol, what signal they're trying to send here.
I think they are trying to send just that signal, and that is their ability to strike at the heart of American power. The Pentagon being the heart of American military power, the World Trade Center being in Lower Manhattan, the heart of the nation's economic power. Both of these structures, the Pentagon and the World Trade Center, in addition being great symbols of these cities, great symbols of America. Their ability to strike those is intended to create alarm and panic throughout the United States.
And in fact, there have been closings of businesses, of schools, of all sorts of things all over the country in the course of this day because of these assaults. I'm wondering if you can give us any of your perspective. Obviously, you don't have a crystal ball to look at these things, but should we regard this as being done at this point? It has been silent for much of the rest of the day since this morning.
One has to be very, very careful in looking at a multiple coordinated attack like this to say exactly when it's over. I mean, it was 31 years ago, almost to the day, that in a single day, 3 airliners were hijacked. One of the hijackings failed, but the other 2 airliners, plus an airliner that was hijacked on the following day, were flown to Desert Airfield in Jordan, where the hijackers, members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, held the hostages for a number of days.
All right, Ms. Jenkins, I'm sorry to have to interrupt you here. We do have some late developments. As you see at the bottom of your screen, there are reports from CNN's Nick Robertson in Kabul, Afghanistan, of explosions there. I want to get some additional information now. CNN's Aaron Brown from his rooftop vantage point in New York. Oh, and actually, this is Nick Robertson now in Kabul. Nick, what can you tell us out there?
Well, Joey, it's about 2:30 in the morning here in Kabul. We can hear explosions around the perimeter of the city. We're in a position here which gives us a view over the whole city. We just heard an impact perhaps a few miles away. If I listen, you can hear the ripple of explosions around the city. Perhaps we've heard there the 5th explosion, 6th explosion. I see gunbursts and starbursts in the air. Tracer fire is coming up out of the city. I hear aircraft flying above the city of Kabul. Perhaps we've heard half a dozen to 10 detonations on the perimeter of the city, some coming from the area close to the airport. I see on the horizon what could be a fire on the horizon, close perhaps to where the airport might be. A flash came up then from the airport. Some ground fire coming up here in Kabul. A lot of flashing reflecting off clouds towards the horizon here. We thought that might have been a thunderstorm before. The detonations we're hearing now much louder than a thunderstorm. Also detonations very similar to those caused by large missiles. I've been in Belgrade and I've been in Baghdad and seen cruise missiles arrive in both those cities. The detonations we're hearing in Kabul right now certainly sound like the detonations of loud missiles that are coming in. We do see tracer fire going up into the air and hear the detonations towards the perimeter of the city, heavy air detonations we can hear now. It's what sounds like a lot of anti-aircraft fire going up, multiple detonations we can hear in the air. I'll try and be quiet for a moment, see if we can pick up some of those sounds coming in from the perimeter of the city, Joey. Very quiet at this particular moment. The city still tracer fire, rockets going up around the airport.